Big diplomatic win. Blinken, the skilled diplomat, right? And you're getting all these reports, but it reeks desperation,
Absolutely.
pathetic desperation from the Biden
Absolutely.
White House. They are
Absolutely.
making this up as they go along.
Yeah.
But we're talking about real problems for the collective West. Real problems.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking about real problems for the Biden White House because, of course, again, the problem is that the sanctions, the big sanctions, the sanctions against the central bank, the Russian central bank, and the de-swifting of the big Russian banks haven't worked out exactly as they were expecting. So they lurched into these oil sanctions. Again, must remember they really do believe that Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. This is an article of faith for them. I mean, they really believe it. So this is their idea that they're going to topple the regime in Moscow by cutting off its oil exports. Except, of course, they're not really people who do markets. They're not people who do industry. They're not people who worked out the implications of this. And what they're seeing, what is now starting to happen is, yes, these pressures are going to cause real disruption in Russia. Unquestionably, they will. But this is over an issue that the Russians care about, and the Russians have ways round. They can find ways round these problems, and they will. But what they are also doing, which is perhaps not what these people, the Blinkens, the Newlands, those sort of people anticipated, is that they are pushing the US itself into recession. Not just any recession, a really bad recession. I mean, we did our live stream with Tom Longo, in which he was explaining what a stagflation crisis is. And I mean, that looks to me like, that's now baked in the cake. So, given that this is so, they are becoming desperate, and they're turning round to Venezuela. They're begging Maduro for help, except, of course, Maduro is bound to answer for complete sanctions relief. How do you explain that? How do you justify that?
And get his gold back.
You get his gold back and all that, exactly. And the Guaido affair, that will have to be. And, that way, then you lose the support of the conservative Hispanic voters, people who vote for Bob Menendez and people of that kind. I mean, they're already tilting like Republican, and Rubio as well. I mean, people like that. So you have that problem, and then of course the other one, which is you pick up, you run with some murmuring comments from the UAE. I mean, I read what the UAE said. Of course, we're prepared to look at this question of raising oil prices or oil production because, well, we're responsible people on the energy markets. It's very, very far short of any actual commitment. And it won't make any difference because, as the Secretary General of OPEC has said, OPEC doesn't have the capacity to replace Russia. Tom Longo was explaining to us that you can't just substitute Urals crude, which is a heavier crude, for light Arabian crude. People who talk in that way don't understand energy markets anyway. But even if you could, the capacity to do it is simply not there. Just as when the European Union talks about, replacing Russian natural gas, the pipeline gas, with liquefied natural gas within a year, it can't be done. The capacity to do that isn't there. So these are just words coming from people who haven't thought this through, who are making it up as they're going along, because Plan A hasn't worked. But they're too committed, too invested in this project to start considering Plan B, or rather reverse. So they have to now turn to Plan B and Plan C and Plan D and Plan E, until, of course, we're not just in a stagflation, but presumably in an outright economic depression. And then we'll see what the outcome of that is.
Right. So in a video that you did the other day, you said that this was very much a sanction policy from the Biden White House. This was a sanction not on Russia, but on the American people. And this was a sanction not on Russia, but on the European people. Can you explain that a bit? Because I'm inclined to say that everyone that is cheering this on, and the reports from CNN, CNN does these fantastical reports where they have the reporter in front of a gas station, and she's saying, "Oh well, I interviewed people here, at this gas station, and they said they're absolutely happy to pay a little bit more for gas if it means that they're going to stick it to Putin and they're going to show their support for Ukraine." I think I don't know if I really buy that report from CNN, but anyway, the people that are saying this embargo that the Biden White House has put in place is going to really stick it to the Kremlin. They haven't realized that the only thing Biden has done is sanction the American and the European middle and working class. Is that not true?
That is absolutely correct. I was actually, again, I mean, we discussed this a bit with Tom Longo yesterday, but if we're talking about Russian oil, I've looked at the market things. It'll take a while for this all to sort out. It doesn't happen in a day, but China can very easily absorb all of Russian oil. I mean, the demand from China for oil is huge. I mean, bear in mind, it's got a population bigger than that of Europe, the United States, Canada, Japan, and South Korea combined. So and it's got a huge economy, and it's a heavily energy-intensive economy. They need oil, and the oil that Russia produces, it turns out, is of the sort that is very well suited to the kind of industrial plant that China has. So China can absorb Russian oil. India probably will want to absorb Russian oil too. So yes, the Russians will go through a period of adjustment, but they will get there. I mean, nobody should be under any doubts about this. What, at the same time, the Biden White House is doing through these sanctions is that it is disrupting, it's intervening in the global oil and energy market. I mean, this is a form of governmental intervention. And what that is going to result in, because this is a non-market intervention in the global energy market, it is inevitably going to lock in a permanently higher price, a much higher price. China will get its oil through pipelines. You don't need ships. Ultimately you can build oil pipelines from Russia. They can go to China. It'll get its pipeline gas. It will get cheaper oil and cheaper gas. The West will get more expensive oil and more expensive gas. And that's going to affect living standards. It's already affecting living standards, and it's also going to affect long-term competitiveness of the Western economies as against the Asian ones, which is, to be straightforward about it, what these kind of interventions, these interferences in the efficient working of markets do. And as is often the case, when you interfere in markets, you don't just raise the price, you create a shortage. And we're very likely to see shortages as well. There's already reports of shortages starting to spread in Europe.
Yeah, Biden has, it seems like he's gone on the attack against the middle and working class
Yeah,
of the
absolutely.
West. I mean,
Absolutely.
He's taken a very hostile decision and action towards the working and middle class. To wrap up the video,
this from a president, just to quickly say, who campaigned that he was going to run a foreign policy for the middle and working classes. That's what he said.
the exact opposite.
He's done the exact
Done the
opposite.
exact opposite. But you got to stick it to Putin, right?
Yeah.
That's the narrative.
And just to say, CNN. How many people follow it? How many people watch CNN?
Yeah,
How many people watch CNN as opposed to Fox News? Could that be because people who follow Fox find it far more relevant to what is going on in their actual lives than the fancies and fantasies that they see on CNN?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, Fox News has been pretty bad on covering
Oh,
war. Actually,
pretty much. Pretty
surprisingly
much.
bad.
But
Surprisingly bad, with the exception of Tucker Carlson, who's starting to get it. I mean, he's
yes, I know.
starting to put the pieces together.
I agree.
Everybody else is just
Oh, I know.
off the cliff. I
They're
mean,
they're awful, but I
but
mean,
you know, it's an,
I give the
yeah.
example of CNN because it's always the outrider on
Yeah,
these
yeah, no,
things.
you're exactly right. No, you're exactly
Yeah,
right. Yeah, but just on a side note, before I get to the final question, I remember in 2015 when you had the war against Ukraine, the civil war, which was coincidentally ordered by Joe Biden. He gave the
yeah,
orders to Poroshenko in order to
yeah.
attack the East. Not many people talk about that, but
No,
that
no.
war was started by the Poroshenko government towards the Donbass. But I remember during that conflict, it was interesting to learn that all the stories that were coming out from the Western mainstream media, all the reporting, including the reporters from Fox News and CNN and Reuters, all of these people who were on the ground in Ukraine, reporting from Ukraine, they were all getting their information from the Ukraine Ministry of Defense and from the Ukraine Foreign Ministry and Communications apparatus. So all the information they were getting and relaying back to the American public or to the European public was the information they were getting from the Ukraine, from the Ukrainian side of things. And there was a ton of misinformation because everyone was thinking, oh, the Ukraine military is destroying the Donbass and they're going to take it in a matter of days and this is a no contest. When I was looking at the information that was coming out from both sides, I was saying to myself,
Yeah,
this militia in the East is going to win.
yeah.
They're building cauldrons again. They were doing the same exact thing.
Exactly.
They
Yeah,
were surrounding the Ukraine military. They were creating these encirclements and these cauldrons, and they were heating up the cauldrons, and they were getting the Ukraine military to surrender, or they would annihilate them up until you got the final cauldron, which was the Debaltsevo cauldron, in which Angela Merkel, in desperation and in panic, called Vladimir Putin, and they came up with the Minsk Accords, which, let's stop the BS. The Minsk Accords were a surrender.
yeah.
That was Poroshenko surrendering to the Donbass. That is what the Minsk Accords were. They were surrender treaty, a surrender document. Anyway, you may want to comment on that because we're seeing the same dynamic.
It is
where
exactly the same
all
dynamic.
the on the ground reporting, all the information that's
Yeah.
coming from these big media channels, the BBC, everything, is coming from reporters who are getting their information directly from
Yeah,
this Ukraine government, whatever
yeah.
that is made up of at this moment in time. And then
Yeah.
I'll give you my last question.
But you're absolutely right. And I remember going through exactly the same process. I remember seeing all these maps that the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council was publishing, and which the BBC was reproducing. And they were, showing relentless advances by the Ukrainian army all over eastern Ukraine and, deep into... Except, of course, then you went and looked at the detailed reports of where the fighting was going on, and they bore no relation to what the maps were showing. On the contrary, they showed that the Ukrainian advance was at a standstill. So I realised that pretty early on, actually, and the more time passed, the more the discrepancy grew. So you had reporting in the West about, the Ukrainians winning, and the reality was that, in fact, it was clear that they were losing. Now, I'm not a military person. I'm not somebody who studies maps. I don't even see maps very well. I've got all kinds of eyesight problems. But it's always very dangerous to take all your information from one side in a war. In this case, in this conflict that we're seeing now, I try to the extent that I can to compare what both sides are saying. I don't assume that either side is telling the full truth or even any, much of the truth. But if you look at where the fighting is going on, where both sides report the fighting going on, that does give you a perhaps more reliable picture. And the picture that I worked out at the time of the 2015 war was one that was bad for Ukraine, and the same is true of the picture that I'm working out this time. The trouble is, all of these journalists in Ukraine are either in Kiev or they're probably involved. I suspect most of them are in Kiev. They're caught up in the excitement of the place. They're going to the, as you said, the foreign ministry, the defense ministry. They're meeting all these Ukrainian people. They've been told all these things. But of course, the one place they don't go to places like ETHEREUM, where there's been a big battle. They don't go to, they don't try and visit the front lines near Mariupol. They don't go to places like this. Donetsk, exactly. They don't go to these sort of places where the real fighting is going on. And that's why they're getting so completely disconnected from what is happening. Now, can I just say, I can remember the days once upon a time, not so long ago, when Western journalists did precisely that. You had war reporters, real war reporters, who actually went to the front lines. And sometimes that was very dangerous for them, but they did it because they were committed to providing a truthful account of the actual progress of the war. But unfortunately, it's many, many years since I've seen them do this today.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly right. They are not going to the places where the real fighting is taking place. And we have to say the militia, the Donbass militia and the military in the Donbass is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and this is fact. They really are doing a lot of heavy lifting. People talk about the Russian military, but those guys in the east are very hardened and experienced fighters over the 8 years that this has been going on. Anyway, the final question is with regards to Russia and the Russian economy. How is it doing? How is it holding up? Is it going to crash? Is there going to be a regime change? Are there bank runs? Because once again, you get a lot of information coming out saying that the banking system's going to collapse. The Russian economy is going to collapse. I've heard reports saying that the Turkish economy is going to collapse from all of this and the connections it has with Russia. Yeah, what is the situation? I also read a report that China is starting to have a difficult time with their trade relations with both Russia and Ukraine. What's the picture there?
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of things. And again, lots of things which we can't really work out and understand. My own understanding is obviously the Russian economy is under a lot of stress. I mean, you can't not be. But I also understand that it's coping. The authorities are doing all the things that you're supposed to do in these kind of situations. They're making sure that there's enough liquidity in the banking system to keep it functioning. It seems to be functioning reasonably well. Financial markets partially reopened on Wednesday, and they seem to be functioning again normally. Retail trade is still continuing. Industry is still growing, or rather, is still producing. Recession, no doubt. Inflation, no doubt too. But uncontrolled collapse, at the moment, it hasn't happened. And I think that was perhaps a disappointment for the people who launched these sanctions 2 weeks ago. And of course, the announcement that the Europeans are going to go on buying Russian oil and the admission by Borrell that financial sanctions against Russia are maxed out is probably within Russia itself going to be a stabilizing factor. Now, there are lots of disruptions and problems across the entire global economy as a result of all of this. China is affected. Turkey is affected. China will sail through. It'll have a lower growth rate this year than it might otherwise have done, but it will sail through. I'm confident Russia will. But always remember, whatever problems these countries have, we in the West are going to have problems also. It's a misconception that there's just going to be a crisis in Russia. We are also, all of us now, going through a crisis, except that I think the Russians will cope with theirs better than we will. Because they've been prepared, let's face it, they've been preparing for it for many years.
Yeah. All right. We will leave it there. Anything else you want to add with regards to the sanctions, to the economic situation, or?
I'm going to say one very brief thing, and I said this in a video yesterday. I mean, I think this has been a final parting of the ways. I'm one of those people who had long believed that, commercial interactions between Russia and the West made such enormous sense for both blocs that that they would survive and endure, and that they would lead to some kind of political rapprochement. I've come to the opinion that all those economic interactions, simply created frictions. I mean, there is such a visceral attitude towards Russia amongst so many people in Europe and in the United States, more in Europe than in the United States, that having Russians buy football clubs, for example, like Roman Abramovich did with Chelsea, is far from creating goodwill, has ended up creating aggravation. So in some ways, it's a final parting of the ways between two partners who really can't get on, can't stand each other. And perhaps once this divorce is executed, we could start to see a more stable situation begin to arise. A Russian official said that, the right thing to do now is forget about friendship, forget about mutually beneficial economic relations, go back to the Cold War pattern of peaceful coexistence. And that seems to me the right way.
Yeah, each party has to go their own way, period. And I agree with that. I think the one thing that this is exposed is the fact that this elite class, and I don't have another word for them. I'll call them the elite or the Davos class. They're not elite, but anyway. And I'm not saying the people. The people of Russia, I believe, do love Europe and the United States. They love visiting these countries, and they get along quite well. And I think the exact reverse holds true as well. The English fans during the World Cup, they loved Russia, and you saw both cultures coming together, and they were fine. There were no problems. So this is not about the people, but this Davos elite class has a visceral, absolute, built-in hate for Russians. I mean, it's undeniable. Call it bigotry, call it racism against Slavs. I don't know what you can call it, but it is this absolute hate for what it means to be Russian, what it means to be Slavic, what it means to even be Orthodox, maybe.
Yes, I think
I don't know,
the
but
latter
this has been exposed.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I feel that as an Orthodox, this has been as an Orthodox Greek, this has been exposed. And
Yes.
And once again, this is not a people thing. I think the people get along very, very well, and
Yes.
they're traveling and they're meeting each other, and there's
Yes.
no problems. But this
Excellent.
elite Davos crowd, for some reason, I don't know. Maybe you can explain it a couple of
No, I
minutes.
can't explain
For
it.
some reason,
I can't explain it.
There's this hate, and maybe it goes back 100 years. We did our history shows with the Tsar, and we talked about that period. I don't know what it is, but
Yes.
it's not going to get resolved.
No, I don't know what it is. I mean, I to be honest, I have as I said, I expected everything over the last couple of weeks. I expected all the sanctions that we've seen, but there is I would say a demented quality to so much that's happened over the last couple of weeks that my opinion is that it's not just a couple of hardline commentators in some newspapers and some hardline politicians. This is a very deep-seated, fundamentally, deeply planted pathology, which we just have to accept as the reality. It's not going to go away. It's not going to go away anytime soon, and you cannot build successful economic relations, trading relations on this basis. I mean, it can't be done. On the contrary, all it's doing is it's making more and more people amongst the elite more and more angry. By the way, it also explains a great deal about the diplomacy, because it's quite obvious to me that, you have all these meetings, you have meetings between Russian diplomats and German diplomats, Russian diplomats and British diplomats. And it's obvious that, behind the smiles, behind the polite words, there is a deep, fundamental, extreme antagonism. And it explains why you get flaky people flaky comments, maybe not flaky people, but flaky comments, like people like, Stoltenberg, who say that, Russia has no right to a veto, no right to a say, no right even to an opinion, apparently. And, when you're up against that kind of mentality, then Forget it. I mean, there's no working with it. Just move on.
Can I make one final statement? And you don't have to elaborate on it. It's just an observation. I've been like following the media coming out of India and some of the statements they've been making, just out of curiosity, because India's stance has been very interesting to me in all of this. I think everything that we have just said, I think the Indian people are also starting to realize it as well, that, we're not so welcome in the West either. It's just an observation. And maybe that
Absolutely.
explains some of the stance, but I don't know. What do you think about that real quick?
It is absolutely true. If you look at what the Indians have been saying, there's been a revulsion of feeling about the West as a result of all of this. I believe the same is true in much of Africa, by the way. And I'm going to make one important observation. The one place where I've seen people speak out against